This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to create your own professional website, portfolio, or online store. It's incredibly easy to use, and every design automatically includes a unique mobile experience that will look great on every device, every time. It starts at just $8 a month and includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. For a free trial and a 10% discount, go to squarespace.com and use offer code BLOGTALK. That's offer code BLOGTALK.
Blog Talk Radio.
Join BluPrint Radio each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. BluPrint Radio host Gloria Thornwell interviews organization leaders on trends and best practices in business and human capital management, business and human resource leadership, and being a change champion in the new global business economy. www.blogtalkradio.com/BluPrint LLC.
Hi, and welcome to BluPrint Radio. BluPrint Radio is a division of the BluPrint Leadership Institute, and on the BluPrint Radio show, we interview organization leaders and change management professionals who are subject matter experts in human capital management, business strategy, government contracting, and those who have reinvented and led organization transformation in the new global and changing economy. I'm Gloria Thornwell, Human Resource and Management Consultant, and your BluPrint Radio show host. On a previous episode, we discussed training fundamentals, specifically for those who have interest in becoming a first-time training professional or what's sometimes referred to as a learning leader, and for those who are already entry-level learning leaders. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on training fundamentals, but with a focus on the intermediate level trainer. So on this episode, we're going to focus on helping the mid-level learning leader acquire additional tips and techniques to enhance their trainer capabilities. We've invited Carla Watson as our featured guest. Carla is a BluPrint Master trainer and facilitator with years of experience in adult learning, and we look forward to our time with Carla on our show today. Welcome, Carla, to BluPrint Radio. So skilled and top-tier training professionals are expected to use a variety of techniques to, number one, engage their learners, and number two, assist their learners retain the learning material. In a global economy, online training is more and more popular, and those who instruct courses using an online format are sometimes required to use different delivery formats, including various communication techniques and engagement tools to ensure that their training participants receive and retain the content. We're going to go to a short commercial break, but when we return, we're going to begin our discussion on tips to become a top-tier trainer with our master learning leader, Carla Watson. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Did you know that when you take a BluPrint Leadership Institute course, you can earn credits towards your PHR, SPHR, and GPHR recertification? The BluPrint Leadership Institute is certified by the Human Resource Certification Institute and by the International Accreditation Organization. Earn CEUs in project management, finance, executive development, and in other disciplines that will keep you current as a 21st century business leader. Register today. www.bluprint-llc.com.
Welcome back to BluPrint Radio. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your BluPrint Radio show host. And our topic today is tips to become a top-tier training professional. And our featured guest is Carla Watson, master trainer and facilitator. Carla, are you on the line, and can you hear us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me on
Carla.
Thank you so much for having me on the. I said thank you so much for having me. Just wanted to make sure I was loud and clear.
Well, welcome, Carla, to the show. We're thrilled and elated to have you as part of our episode today. So I'm going to just kind of dive right in. Many of my listeners know I like to just dive right into the questions. So I'm going to start, Carla. My first question is about communication. So we all know that one of the basic premises of being an effective training professional is to have effective communication skills. So can you share with our listening audience 3 tips to become a more effective communicator when leading a training course?
Absolutely. And before I do that, I just want to give it back to you and just thank you for having me on your platform here with BluPrint Radio. Really excited about what you're doing here in the community, helping, businesses become definitely more effective here, especially one of my topics that I admire and love is training. So I definitely will dive right in. So for me, for 3 tips to being a more effective communicator when training, there's some simple practices. And I think that the first practice is just being, understanding the importance of effective communication because everything communicates. And I think that, people really don't understand that it's now accepted that, the words account for only 7 to 11% of what we say. So we think that we have all this information and we're going to just say it. But, it's more than that because everything communicates from, your behavior, from how you're dressing, from, just the way that you're moving your hands. So we have to really, really be cognizant on what we're doing and when we start our training on a daily basis. So the first tip would be effective, just understanding that being an effective communicator is really, really going to be the key to you having a great training experience and not so great training experience. And I think the second thing is just interpersonal skills because what you do matters as much as what you say. And so we have to, be careful about how we are communicating and how our audience may be looking at us. So the interpersonal skills is something that's really, really key. So know the message that you want to get across to your trainees. So not just, you may have a template, you may have a PowerPoint, but you really need to know how you want that message to get across to your trainees. And I think the last thing is pace. We have to be very careful, and for me especially, when I began training years ago, about 17 or 18 years ago, very, very fast talker. And people would just look at me, and I'm sure that, some people told me I sound like Charlie Brown, like wah, wah, wah. And they really, really didn't know, exactly what I was saying. And I thought I was this great trainer. And so pace is going to be the key. You must be careful that you don't lose your audience. So, Gloria, I would say that the top 3, effective communicator, you want to have interpersonal skills, and you definitely want to be careful of your pace.
I think those are great, excellent, 3 tips. I know for me, I work on my pace all the time. And so sometimes it's hard, and particularly if you really are excited about the content, you know it really well, and sometimes you just kind of speed it up. But you have to remember that you are speaking to an audience of learners. And one of the, for them to actually receive the content, you do have to really watch your pace and be really cognizant of that. So excellent first 3 tips. My next question, Carla, relates to storytelling and humor. How important is it to use storytelling and or humor, during and throughout your training course?
I think it's very, very important, especially, this is what I would say. For me, I always put myself in the position of the trainee, the one that's sitting, on the other side of the table, and they had to, they got a note from their supervisor, their director, to say that they had to go to, let's say, a 5-day training. And so they're not excited about it. So you can tell on that very first day that they just want to get it over with. And so I put myself in that position as I am putting together, my training curriculum, how I'm going to facilitate, how the flow is going to go, and where humor is really, really important is because you want to bring it down. You want people to begin to be relaxed because once they're relaxed, they'll feel better about, the information that's being shared. They'll feel better about getting involved. And something that's big is storytelling. It's very important because, there's a saying and it says stories sell, but facts tell. Because if you think about it, our parents and our grandparents, they told us bedtime stories and not bedtime facts. And so you want your audience to begin to be able to relate to what you're saying. And they really can relate. Regardless of the topic of your training topic, they can really relate through a story. If you're talking about health care, for an example, and you use a family member not having license, not having health insurance, and how that could impact that person. And so they're more likely to say, hey, well, let me pay attention to the statistics. So that will then prepare them if there's a test, if there's a certification that they need to get. So stories and humor are a huge component to your training. I mean, that is huge. If you had any takeaways, that's definitely one that you want to take away. Stories and humor are very important, definitely to a successful training.
I agree. I think that storytelling, really helps to make the training, as you said, more successful. It makes it more effective. And if there is a story that, as you said, relates to the training or, a personal story, sometimes that really brings it home, and it really helps the learners to connect to the content when we, sometimes use stories. So let me ask you, Carla, when you're delivering face-to-face or instructor-led training, how does one keep the learning participants engaged?
Okay, so just say the question again. I'm sorry.
No worries. So when you're delivering face-to-face or instructor-led training, how does one keep the learning participants engaged in the training?
I think that one important way, or I'll give you a couple of ways to keep participants engaged, is to change up your routine. And so with that being said, the first day that they come in, you definitely want to start with an icebreaker, and you can do that every single day because they look forward to that. But as far as keeping them engaged, something that I found, to be effective is to break them into groups. Okay, you can break them into groups, let's say at the beginning of that training session, and you can even break them into groups every day so that they're in a different group. But it seems to be effective that I do, and I always keep them in the same group. Why? Because they begin to build relationships. They become more competitive with the other groups, so they're trying to, really, really, do the assignment that you've assigned. So the first time you break them into groups, you may find that they're trying to skate through. Like they're not really putting a lot into it, because you want to do your best to have as much engagement as possible. So that's really going to take some planning on your part as a facilitator, as a trainer, to really plan activities that really, really align to what you're training to. So I would say group activities. I would say that you want to do some impromptu questioning. It could be with a toss ball. It can be with candy. You want to have something where they don't know that you're going to do it. It's not routine. Those are going to be effective as it relates to, keeping your participants engaged.
So, Carla, on the flip side, how does one keep the training participants engaged if one is delivering a webinar or remote training? And that, to me, seems a little bit more challenging. But how do you keep those participants engaged when they're online?
And Gloria, to your point, I would definitely agree that webinars are definitely more challenging because you could be doing anything, while you're listening to a webinar. So a webinar is simply a seminar given online instead of in person, so we know that. So some best practices, we use kind of the same principles as face-to-face. You want to make sure that they're engaging. We talked about that a few minutes ago. You want to make sure that they're smooth, and you want to make sure that they're timed appropriately because it's difficult because you can't see the body language of your attendees. So you want to make sure that you're spreading out the time, that you're allotting for breaks. And I know that we're going to talk about that as we move forward, but you want to make sure that you have it smooth, that you're not fumbling, and you want to make sure that your slides are interactive. You don't want to have slides that just have 3 bullets and you're going to be on that same slide for 20 to 30 minutes. You want to make sure that they're interactive. You may even have music, okay? And so as it relates to webinars, those are some key tips, to have an effective webinar. Timing is important. The way that it runs smoothly is very important, and how you interact throughout the webinar definitely will be as important as well.
Yeah, I've been a part of some webinar, trainings where the facilitator or the learning leader used video. And so the videos help, because as you said, it's different, it's not expected. And then, we can have a discussion after viewing the video. So I think those types of things, as you mentioned, are, kind of out of the box thinking. And I think to really keep the participants engaged over using remote training tools, it's really important to use, to kind of think outside of the box and use tools and things that they wouldn't expect. So.
Right, and it brings you back to when we talked about, storytelling. So just think about if you put, a video that aligned to, whatever your topic was and how important that topic was, or how that video needs to tie into that. And then they'll really, really engage themselves. And what they'll be doing, they'll look for it. They'll expect it. As we go into different topics or different modules, they'll begin to, be excited about what's coming next, because you always want to keep it smooth. You always want to have something different, because a webinar is definitely, harder than something face-to-face, because you can read your audience. So I definitely agree with you that it is kind of challenging. So I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. Carla, we're going to go to a short commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with you. You are one of our master trainers, and our topic today is tips to becoming a top-tier training professional, so please stay tuned.
Did you know that when you take a BluPrint Leadership Institute course, you can earn credits towards your PHR, SPHR, and GPHR recertification? The BluPrint Leadership Institute is certified by the Human Resource Certification Institute and by the International Accreditation Organization. Earn CEUs in project management, finance, executive development, and in other disciplines that will keep you current as a 21st century business leader. Register today. www.blueprint-llc.com.
Welcome back to BluPrint Radio. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your BluPrint Radio show host. Our topic today is tips to becoming a top-tier training professional, and our guest is Carla Watson, Master BluPrint Trainer and faculty member with our BluPrint Leadership Institute. Carla, let's talk a little bit more about webinars or remote training sessions. So my question is, what makes remote or webinar trainings most effectively? More specifically, are there certain types of activities or exercises that tend to work best with remote learners?
Sure. So let's talk about what makes them more effective. You want to, as you're planning your webinars, depending upon your time, because your timing is going to be kind of important as you're laying out how your webinars go, whether you're going to have a 3-hour webinar, a 1-hour webinar, even a 6-hour webinar. You want to kind of assign team captains. Okay, you want to have subject matter experts on that webinar. You may even want to have panel discussions. Okay, this is talking about really making it effective, really creating activities, really having some type of involvement with everyone with everyone that's going to be on your webinar, and you want to have audience participation. And something that's really key, to having an effective webinar is to have it tied into their attendance. Let's say that you on your housekeeping rules at the beginning, on the onset of the webinar, you may want to do something to say, like, if you are logged out for longer than 15 or 20 minutes, then you won't get credit for this webinar. Or you can also talk about how the questions are going to be tied to the attendance. And so they're going to be more attentive because they don't want to go through the webinar as it is, but just imagine them having to do it again just because of simple mistakes. And so those are things to create, excitement, to have engagement as you are laying out your webinar, to have all of those things. Your subject matter expert can ensure that all the questions that they may have are answered, so they'll be waiting for that. They'll be posting their questions in your Q&A panel, or you can have a chat panel that can be going on throughout the webinar. You can have, prizes that were awarded to, the top team with the top questions or something like that. There's many different things that you can do to have effective webinars, but definitely activities or exercises, as I stated, are very important to have, with your audience participation.
So talk to us, Carla, a bit about facilitating group or team assignments during the remote training session. I would imagine that is particularly challenging. So in other words, are there specific tools, webinar tools or whatever, that are best used to facilitate remote group discussions and assignments during the webinar? So in other words, they can really grasp the learning, but again, do it in a group format so that the participants are engaging with each other.
Yes, just a little bit as we talked before, the last question. There is a site that, you can Google, and it's called A Few Good Conferencing Tools, okay? And it offers a roundup of affordable software. So there's softwares as it relates to webinar training, and it talks about different things, different visuals, because what you want to have, you want to plan your visuals, you want to use interactive slides. And so you can set your webinar up to have team captains. So you want to do all of those things, because facilitating, amongst a group, I've done webinars where there could be, 20 people to 700 people. And so you can set it up where you have teams, and they could be teams A, B, C, and D. And so they can see just their team answers, and then you can share them. So you can get all this information on what's called A Few Good Conferencing Tools. It offers a roundup of just affordable software tips to just prepare yourself for webinars. As that, when I say prepare, that is going to be any activities that you want to have, any panel discussions that you want to set up. It talks about interactive. You can have things jumping across the screen. You don't want to just have it, just like I said earlier, just a plain, PowerPoint that has 3, 4, 5 bullets that's going to need to be up there for, 20 to 30 minutes. That definitely won't work, and that definitely won't keep the attention of the audience. And so, I definitely, advise you to Google, there's a lot of activities that you can do. And as I said, you can set up different or stage it differently on the webinars. You set it up through, you can use WebEx. There's several webinar softwares that you can use to set up webinars, but some best practices are, group activities, as it relates to webinars, definitely to keep your audience definitely involved, because that is a tough thing. Webinars are, and I remember I started to do that. And, when you think about webinars, you have to really, really, really focus on your pace and your pitch and your tone, because that is going to be the difference between people having to retake it, people hanging up, people not wanting to get on the next day. So you have to incorporate all of those things, and you have to be, cautious even more so on a webinar versus face-to-face, okay? Because remember, we have a lot of people out there judging, what they're thinking. As we're standing up there, we talked about how our body language, how everything communicates. And so remember, on a webinar, they can't see any of that. So it's going to be important that you are prepared to do all those different things, and you have to have it outlined so that it's smooth. You have a smooth transition as it relates to webinars.
Absolutely. I would agree wholeheartedly. Can you tell our listeners again the website so that they could learn the different, or at least review the different types of activities and tools they could use to host or to facilitate group sessions? Give that web address one more time.
Okay, sure. There's several, but there's one in particular. It's called A Few Good Conferencing Tools. A Few Good Conferencing Tools. That is correct. And it just affords, I'm sorry?
I'm just repeating it. A Few Good Conferencing Tools.
That is correct. It affords a roundup of just kind of affordable software that, you can purchase. Some you can Google to get them free online. You can purchase from that particular website to incorporate in your webinar, your presentation. That allows it to be more interactive, yes.
That's excellent. And that is so necessary, as you mentioned, for a webinar. Webinars can sometimes be pretty dry if the facilitator, the trainer, the instructor is not well prepared and doesn't have the tools to keep the group interactive and, facilitate group sessions. A lot of adult learners learn from group activities and from groups and from group engagement and group exercises. That many times that's how adults learn best. Talk to our listeners, Carla, just for about a minute or so about the length of a remote training session. So in other words, if there's a webinar, is there an average or a maximum amount of time that a remote session or that a webinar should be held? Is it 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours? What's the average or the maximum that you find is best for remote learners?
I would say that it depends. And, an hour is great. But I think an average would be 3 hours, but it's important to incorporate breaks if you're going to have a 3-hour webinar. So if I would have to say an average, it would be 3 hours to incorporate a break after every module.
Okay. We are going to take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up our topic today, tips to become a top-tier training professional, and we'll be right back.
Did you know that when you take a BluPrint Leadership Institute course, you can earn credits towards your PHR, SPHR, and GPHR recertification? The BluPrint Leadership Institute is certified by the Human Resource Certification Institute and by the International Accreditation Organization. Earn CEUs in project management, finance, executive development, and in other disciplines that will keep you current as a 21st century business leader. Register today. www.blueprint-llc.com.
Welcome back to BluPrint Radio. Our discussion today is improving your professional training skills. and to become a top-tier training professional. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your radio show host. Our expert today is Carla Watson, Master Trainer and faculty with the BluPrint Leadership Institute. Carla, let's talk about breaks. What a great segue. So we talked for a minute about how long or the average time a webinar should be held. Let's talk about breaks. So you talked a little bit about breaks. Specifically, should there be one break, two breaks? Like about how many breaks would you recommend, and how long? If yes, how long should the break be? Should it be a minute? 15 minutes? How long should remote learners break before coming back to the webinar to continue the learning session?
Okay, great. Yeah, that was definitely a great segue as it relates to breaks. So it's going to depend on the length of your webinar course. I would say that if you were going to do a 1 hour, I would say that a break is definitely not necessary with an hour webinar. So if you're going to be doing 2 hours or more, I would definitely say that a break is needed. So the longer the webinar is, the longer the break. So let's just go with 3 hours as our minimum, as our webinar time. If you had a 3-hour webinar, after every module, I would take a 10-minute break, okay? So a 10-minute break, you can say, classroom standard time, or my computer says, right now it's 2 o'clock and we're going to be expected to be back by 2:10. But remember, as you are setting up we talked about having this really smooth transition, with the housekeeping rules. That's one thing that needs to be really, really done right, because you want to say that when we take breaks, all this accounts for your attendance. So as you come back, they could sign in, or they can hit a button, or they can, so that that they're back from their breaks, because you don't want people to run off for 10, 20, 30 minutes and then come back and think it's okay. So I think that the length of time for a 3-hour webinar is after you finish modules. If the modules are, long, you may want to do a 10-minute break. If they're not so long, let's say a 5-minute break, I would say like a 2 to 3 minute break doesn't really make sense. It doesn't give people a lot of time to do much. So I would say a 10-minute break is average, but you want to tie it into their attendance to ensure that they're definitely back. And if you were to go longer into like the 4, 5, 6 hours, you would definitely lengthen the breaks a little longer. Again, tie it back into their attendance.
Excellent. Carla, we have just a few minutes left. We have about 4 minutes left. Let me ask you, in summary, what are 3 features of an effective top-tier training professional?
I would say, with 3 minutes or less, I would say it's definitely communication. It's going to definitely be your interpersonal skills. And it's going to really be, and this is very important, it's going to be how prepared you are, because you definitely want to be prepared. Just imagine you're coming in late. You want to be prepared. You want to understand, or you want to know what message you want to get across to your listeners, to your trainees. You want to have all of that stuff ready. You want to arrive about an hour and a half, before. So those things are going to make or break your training session. So you want to have great communication skills. Remember, every single thing communicates. You want to have interpersonal skills, and you want to be prepared. Those are tips that will really, really be the key to your success in holding, whether it will be a face-to-face training or a webinar training.
Carla, we have had an excellent discussion with you today. Again, Carla is one of our certified master training professionals and faculty with our BluPrint Leadership Institute. Carla, we want to thank you so much for joining BluPrint Radio today and sharing your expertise on how one might become a top-tier training professional. And in just a couple of months, actually, in May, Carla is going to do a workshop on how to become a top-tier training professional at our BluPrint Training Center. To register for our Train the Trainer course, you may visit BluPrint at www.bluprint, without the E, BLUPRINT-LLC.com, then click on Leadership Institute and then Leadership Track. www.bluprint-llc.com, click Leadership Institute, and then Leadership Track. Thank you for joining BluPrint Radio. We hope that you will join us each Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Until next time.
Join BluPrint Radio each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. BluPrint Radio host Gloria Thornwell interviews organization leaders on trends and best practices in business and human capital management, business and human resource leadership, and being a change champion in the new global business economy. www.blogtalkradio.com/BluPrint LLC.